Today we will explore the fascinating world of wine production during the Middle Ages, an era in which this drink transcended its role as a simple foodstuff to become a symbol of spirituality, survival, and human ingenuity. Before continuing with the video, remember to subscribe to the channel for more documentary narratives like this one. Imagine for a moment standing in the fields of medieval Europe. The air carries the gentle scent of ripe vines, and in the distance, the bells of a monastery mark the hours of the day. In this seemingly simple landscape, an ancient and mysterious process was being preserved and perfected by dedicated hands. A drink that connected heaven to earth, the sacred to the profane, flowed from the hills to the barrels, from the barrels to the tables, and from the tables into history. This is the journey of medieval wine, a narrative that found its moment of greatest transformation in the Middle Ages. 2,000 years ago, long before the medieval period, there existed a belief deeply rooted in ancient civilizations. People believed that gods inhabited the grapes themselves, those small spheres of sweet juice that hung from the vines under the Mediterranean sun. For these peoples, the act of harvesting the grapes and transforming them into wine was not simply agricultural labor or an economic necessity. It was a sacred ritual, a way to transcend common life and establish a direct connection with the divine. When the fermented juice touched their lips, they believed they were communing with higher forces, absorbing the very essence of the gods who lived within those fruits. This mystical view of wine persisted through the centuries, adapting as societies evolved. With the advent of Christianity and the growing influence of the Catholic Church over all aspects of European life, wine gained new dimensions of meaning. The Church, recognizing the symbolic power of this drink and its long sacred tradition, began to establish clear distinctions between different categories of wine. Thus, a fundamental division emerged that would shape wine culture throughout the Middle Ages. On one side, there was sacred wine, reserved for the most important rituals of the Christian faith. This special wine was used to commune with God, to atone for sins, and to seek divine forgiveness. It is in this tradition that we find the origins of Christian communion, the moment when the faithful consume the consecrated wine as a representation of the blood of Christ. Sacred wine was treated with absolute reverence, handled only by ordained clergy and kept in special containers. Its production and storage followed rigorous rules, as any contamination or improper treatment would be considered a sacrilege that could attract divine wrath upon the entire community. On the other side of this division was secular wine, intended for daily consumption by the common population. This wine carried no spiritual significance. It was simply a beverage to be enjoyed during meals, to celebrate festive occasions, or to quench thirst after a long day of work in the fields. Secular wine was the constant companion of common people, present on their humble tables as much as in the halls of nobles. But why did wine occupy such a central place in medieval life? The answer lies in a reality that today might seem strange, but which was absolutely crucial at that time. Water, the primary source of hydration for any human being, represented a constant danger during the Middle Ages. Rivers, wells, and springs were frequently contaminated with bacteria and pathogens that caused serious and often fatal diseases. Without the knowledge of microorganisms that modern science has provided us, the people of that era did not understand why water made them sick. But they had learned that certain drinks were safer. Wine, with its alcoholic content, even if modest, had the ability to eliminate many of the bacteria that infested common water. Alcohol acted as a natural antibacterial agent, making wine one of the safest drinks available to the population. In addition to its relative safety, wine also offered valuable calories in a time when hunger was a constant threat. Each sip of wine represented energy that could mean the difference between survival and death during long European winters. Vines possessed characteristics that made them particularly suitable for medieval agriculture. Unlike many other crops that required fertile soil and abundant irrigation, grapes could thrive in adverse conditions. Rocky slopes, inclined terrains where few other crops could establish themselves, became productive vineyards. Vines required less water than most cultivated plants, a significant advantage in regions where irrigation systems were primitive. With wine occupying such a crucial role in medieval society, it is no surprise that its production was dominated by the most powerful and organized institutions of the time. The largest producers of wine during the Middle Ages were the members of the Catholic Church. Priests, monks, nuns, and friars dedicated much of their time and resources to cultivating vineyards and producing wine. They planted the vines, cared for their growth throughout the seasons, harvested the grapes at the precise moment of ripeness, and conducted the entire complex fermentation process. Among the religious orders, two stood out particularly for their contribution to European wine culture. The Benedictine monks, following the rule of Saint Benedict, which valued manual labor as a form of prayer, developed sophisticated cultivation and production techniques. Their monasteries became centers of winemaking excellence, where knowledge was preserved, perfected, and transmitted through generations. The Cistercians went even further in their dedication to viticulture. This religious order became famous for the quality of the wines it produced, but also for its role in spreading winemaking knowledge. They shared this knowledge with the communities around them, offering training on how to grow vines and produce wine. Outside the monastery walls, kings and feudal lords also maintained their own vineyards. These aristocrats could cultivate vast stretches of land dedicated exclusively to wine production. The wine produced on these estates supplied the tables of noble halls, where it was served at elaborate banquets. Many nobles chose to donate portions of their vineyard lands to the church, seen as acts of piety that could guarantee divine favors. In the countryside, entire families were involved in the work of the vineyards. During harvest time, men, women, and children worked side by side among the rows of vines. Children, with their small and agile hands, were particularly valuable for reaching clusters of grapes in hard-to-access places among the dense foliage. The work was arduous and the days long, but for many peasant families, the vineyard represented a crucial source of sustenance. One of the most surprising revelations when studying the medieval history of wine is discovering that England, a country today more associated with beer and tea, was for centuries an important wine producer. At the end of the 11th century, there were approximately 50 documented vineyards in the south of England. These vineyards flourished for more than 300 years. The English climate at the time was mild enough to allow for the successful cultivation of certain grape varieties. The English connection with wine was even deeper due to political reasons. For much of the Middle Ages, the English crown controlled the region of Bordeaux in southwestern France. This area, with its unique combination of climate and soil, proved to be exceptionally suitable for viticulture. Under English control, Bordeaux developed a thriving wine industry that helped establish the region as one of the most important in the world. Ships loaded with barrels of wine regularly departed from French ports toward England, where the drink was eagerly consumed by the nobility and the growing merchant class. In the mid-16th century, Europe experienced what historians call the Little Ice Age. Temperatures dropped significantly across the continent. For English vineyards, these changes were catastrophic. Grapes could no longer ripen properly, and vineyards that had produced wine for generations were abandoned. This climate change ended up benefiting other regions. Burgundy emerged as a wine powerhouse, where Cistercian monks had already established monasteries centuries before. Bordeaux consolidated its position under French control. The Rhine Valley in Germany also established itself as an important wine region, producing aromatic white wines that found an eager market throughout Europe. If we could travel back in time and taste medieval wine, we would probably be surprised and disappointed by its flavor. Historical accounts suggest that the wine of that era was considerably different from what we know today, and not necessarily in a positive way. Many documents describe wines with flavors ranging from unpleasant to absolutely undrinkable. The primary reason for this difference in quality lay in the technological limitations of the time. The glass bottle with a cork stopper simply did not exist during the Middle Ages. Without sealed glass bottles, medieval wine was stored primarily in wooden barrels and casks. These containers presented a fundamental problem. Wood, even when well treated, is porous. Small amounts of air could penetrate through the structure of the barrel, initiating an oxidation process that rapidly degraded the wine. The most favorable time to consume wine was autumn, right after the fermentation of the newly harvested grapes. At this time, the wine still maintained its youth and freshness, with fruity notes coming from the grapes and the natural effervescence of the carbon dioxide produced during fermentation. For these reasons, autumn wine was also the most expensive. As the months passed, the wine stored in barrels began its inevitable deterioration. Oxidation altered its characteristics, making it progressively harsher. Historians have concluded that even the best wines produced in medieval Europe would have been considered inferior to the wines of ancient Rome and Greece. The ancients frequently infused wine with natural resins that acted as preservatives. They stored the drink in ceramic vessels which were less porous than wood. These techniques, lost during the turbulent centuries following the fall of the Roman Empire, resulted in medieval wines of inferior quality. Faced with this problem of deterioration, medieval producers and consumers developed various methods to try to preserve or recover their wines. One of the most popular methods for preservation involved the use of olive oil. Producers would pour a layer of olive oil over the surface of the wine in the barrels. Since oil is less dense than wine and does not mix with it, it formed a protective film floating on top of the drink, creating a physical barrier between the wine and the air. For wines that had already turned sour, there were even more creative recipes to try to save them. An elaborate French technique involved soaking wheat in water, boiling it until a thick mixture was obtained, and then adding this paste directly to the barrel of sour wine. If this method did not produce satisfactory results, it was prescribed to insert a basket full of well-washed sand into the barrel. These methods rarely produced the desired results. Most people recognized that a spoiled wine could hardly be recovered. The most common strategy was simply to mask the unpleasant flavors. Spices such as cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and ginger were added to the wine in generous amounts. Honey provided sweetness that counterbalanced the excessive acidity. Aromatic herbs contributed their own flavors. The poorer classes kept their wine in containers made of animal hide. Goatskin wineskins served as a cheap alternative to barrels, but they introduced their own problems. The leather imparted strange and often unpleasant flavors to the wine. However, even this wine was considered preferable to contaminated water. For those without access to wine, there was an even humbler alternative. Grape pomace, the byproduct of production, consisting of the skins, seeds, and pulp already pressed, was mixed with water to create a drink known as piquette. A common practice was the dilution of wine with water, which extended the available quantity and reduced the alcohol content. The issue of drunkenness during the Middle Ages deserves special attention. Most of the wine consumed daily had a fairly low alcohol content, especially when diluted with water. The demands of hard labor did not allow for a population incapacitated by alcohol. That being said, occasions of excessive consumption certainly occurred during festivities. Observers of the time developed a colorful way of describing the stages of intoxication using animal analogies. A lightly intoxicated person was compared to a sheep, becoming more docile. As consumption increased, the person passed to the state of a lion, becoming more assertive. An even higher level transformed the person into a monkey, behaving in foolish ways. Finally, extreme drunkenness reduced the person to the state of a pig. Spiced. Mulled wine has its origins recorded as early as the 2nd century in ancient Rome. This drink crossed the centuries and remains a symbol of winter celebrations. During the Middle Ages, it represented a sophisticated way to transform ordinary wine into something special. The base wine used was generally a red of lower quality. The list of added ingredients reveals the global trade that already connected different parts of the world: ginger, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and cardamom. To sweeten it, honey was used instead of refined sugar, which was extremely rare and expensive. Dried cherries, raisins, and almonds were frequently added. The cost of the spices made this preparation a luxury reserved for special occasions. Glass bottles with cork stoppers were introduced only in the 17th century. Glass, impermeable to air, protected the wine from oxidation much more efficiently. However, adoption was slow. Bottles were fragile and expensive to produce. The first models had flat bottoms and rounded shapes. Over time, they became more elongated. An ingenious modification was the introduction of an indentation in the bottom, which distributed the weight of the liquid more uniformly. Around 1820, bottles assumed a shape similar to what we know today. Between 1636 and 1860, it was illegal in Great Britain to sell wine in bottles. It was feared that merchants would sell bottles of varying sizes, cheating consumers. To circumvent this prohibition, wealthy consumers bought their own bottles, often personalized with identifying seals, and sent them to their preferred vintners. The merchant would then fill these bottles with the chosen wine, and the customer paid only for the drink, not for the container that already belonged to them. The grape harvest represented one of the most important moments of the medieval agricultural calendar. Timing was crucial, as harvesting at the exact moment of ripeness largely determined the quality of the wine. During the harvest, entire communities mobilized for the work. After the harvest, the grapes needed to be crushed to release their juice. It is at this point that we find one of the most iconic images of viticulture, that of people treading grapes in large containers. This technique, known by the French term pigage, was quite sophisticated. Human feet were ideal tools for crushing grapes in a controlled manner, breaking the grapes without excessively grinding the seeds, which could release bitter compounds. The main goal of pigage was not simply to extract the juice from the grapes. When grapes are crushed and begin to ferment, the skins and solids tend to float to the surface of the liquid, forming a layer called the cap. If this cap is left undisturbed, acidic compounds begin to form, harming the quality of the wine. Treading the grapes repeatedly throughout the process served to submerge this cap, continuously mixing it with the juice. This mixing ensured a proper extraction of tannins, compounds that contribute to the flavor, color, and longevity of the wine. Tannins also function as natural antioxidants, helping to protect the wine from deterioration. Therefore, what might seem like a primitive technique was actually a carefully calibrated method to produce the best wine possible. After the initial crushing, the juice was transferred to containers where fermentation would occur for 1 to 2 weeks. The difference between white and red wines originated from the time of contact between the juice and the skins. For white wines, the skins were removed at the beginning of the process. For red wines, the skins remained in contact for longer periods, extracting pigments and tannins. The terminology used to describe the different professions related to wine production reveals much about how this activity was organized. The word vintager, derived from the term vintage, referred to those involved in the cultivation and harvesting of grapes. The word vintage itself goes back to the Latin vindimia, a combination of the words for wine and to remove. The term vintner originally referred to wine producers, later expanding to include those who stored and sold the drink. As we contemplate this rich history, from the mystical beliefs that saw gods inhabiting grapes to the scientific methods of the Cistercian monks, we realize that medieval wine was much more than a simple drink. It was a fundamental element of civilization, connecting the sacred to the secular, the rich to the poor, the past to the present. The monks who patiently cultivated their vines, the peasants who worked under the sun during harvests, the merchants who transported barrels across rivers and roads, the nobles who drank from silver cups, and the workers who shared leather wineskins, all were participants in a tradition that stretched back millennia and would continue for many more. When we open a bottle of wine today, we rarely think about the long journey that brought this drink to our tables. Each sip is a connection to those who came before us, who also found in wine a pleasure, a comfort, or simply a necessity for survival. The history of medieval wine teaches us about human ingenuity in the face of technological limitations, about the ability to transform a basic necessity into a refined art. And so, our journey through the vineyards of medieval history comes to an end. But the story of wine continues to be written with every harvest, every bottle opened, every toast shared between friends and strangers. If you have made it this far and enjoyed this trip through time, leave your comment telling us which aspect of medieval viticulture surprised you the most. Each comment helps us understand what you want to learn in our next documentaries. If this content enriched your knowledge in some way, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. That way you will be the first to know when we publish our next exploration into the fascinating chapters of human history. And don't forget to like the video, as your support motivates us to continue researching and sharing these narratives that connect our present to the rich legacy of the past until the next journey through history.